So the study for today is from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and it is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they practiced what I believe is an important concept or behavior for Christians, and that is to practice civil disobedience, or the word I'm going to use is dissent. Now, from my perspective, anytime any group of believers, people of faith, completely is co-opted by the civil government or by government or by people in authority, there's something wrong. Because inevitably, I don't care who the government is, they're going to be doing things which are in opposition or at least in the wrong direction to where people of faith or people who follow the Bible want to go. And so as a result, there should never be a moment in time when a church, people of faith, people who follow Scripture are completely in step with the people in authority. If there is, from my perspective, there's something wrong. So the question is, when do you dissent, and to what degree do you dissent? And actually, I have three questions that we're going to start with that I hope you're going to discuss in your life group. First question is this: when is it right for believers to practice dissent? And maybe kind of as an add-on to that first question, not only when, but to what degree? Because we see here with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that they took dissent to a significant level, so much so where it could have cost them their lives. Second question is, in terms of dissent, why is dissent, or the courage to practice civil disobedience, why is it important to faith? And just to throw my little 2 cents in there, and that is that faith grows in the midst of dissent, or in the midst of civil disobedience. When we practice civil disobedience, our faith grows, because we have to learn how to depend on God, sometimes in the face of dire threats. But I'm going to let you guys talk about that. And then finally, how is dissent, or civil disobedience, how is that important in terms of being a witness to the world? And I'll let you answer those three questions, and I'll just take a few minutes here to unpack the passage. So the backdrop for this passage is the tyrannical leadership of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was kind of a funny guy. You know, this Babylonian leader who had led the charge into Israel and taken captive the remaining peoples of Israel, and they were taken into Babylonian captivity. And you may recall that the Assyrians had started the process in the mid-8th century BC. Well, what the Assyrians started, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians finished. So they had been taken into captivity. Nebuchadnezzar had, for the most part, set up a system of satrapy that was respectful of the people of a variety of religions, but he had been influenced by people who wanted the Babylonian hierarchy, pantheon of gods to be more respected. And so Nebuchadnezzar, for whatever reason, had felt, maybe he felt pressured, maybe it was because he was tyrannical in nature, which we see this elsewhere, who knows? But as a result, he bends to pressure, and he builds this large image, a 90-foot image covered in gold, and he has this ridiculous, and talk about tyrannical and maniacal, he has this ridiculous law formed where people had to bow down and worship this man-made image. Well, obviously, the Jewish people that were living in Babylon at the time, and it was a large minority population, which included Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that large minority population is going to find themselves immediately in conflict with this command that is given by Nebuchadnezzar. Well, just to kind of unpack it a little bit more, the image that was set up, I set out to find out what is that image, because it's not necessarily explicit. And there really are two main theories about this image that Nebuchadnezzar made this law, so everybody in the land had to bow down and worship it. And there had to be, not only worship it, there had to be a level of earnestness about their worship. They wanted to enforce that the worship be authentic and sincere. And of course, you can't do that. That's tyranny in its worst form. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to do. Anyway, as I said, there's two main theories about who this image portrayed. The one main theory is that it was Nebuchadnezzar himself, that he set up an image of himself. It was 90 foot tall. It was covered in gold. That this was an attempt by him to set up some kind of emperor worship or leader of Babylon worship, whatever you want to call it. It would have been kind of a narcissistic, egomaniacal attempt for everybody to worship him. I happen to believe that's not what took place here. The leading god of the Babylonian pantheon was a god named Baal, or B-E-L, or the similar form of that god was found more in the western region of Mesopotamia, and that was Baal, or B-A-A-L. This god was the god of storms, and this god was the principal god of that particular region of Babylon. And there are some scholars, some people that believe that Baal or Bel became Zeus and was later worshipped all over the Greek world. Now, there is some evidence that might be true. It is interesting that Baal or Bel was considered to be a demon. It was considered to be an unpredictable, vengeful god, and this is one reason why he's called the god of storms. And so when people worship this particular god, they worshiped him not out of a sense of reverence because he was some kind of a creator god or anything like that. He was a storm god, or a little g god, because he was unpredictable, and therefore because he was a demon of unpredictability, he had to be appeased. And when I use the term appeased, what I mean by appeased is that they made a variety of sacrifices to this particular god to make sure that the god stayed happy so they wouldn't have a storm or a cataclysm. This tells you everything you need to know about the nature of Bel, which is what he was called in Babylon. So it's likely, from my perspective, that the image that is set up is a 90-foot image of a demon, little g god, that was an attempt by the people in Babylon to appease this particular demon god. There is no doubt that when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but especially Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but many other Jews, heard that this image had been set up and there was going to be required worship of this particular image, that they were deeply concerned, and their conscience would forbid them from ever considering participating in this kind of worship. And I think it really, really is important that I underscore what I said at the beginning at this point. A believer's purpose is, as I've said it in an earlier teaching, is to be at peace with all men. That's what a believer's purpose inside of a civil society. As much as possible, be at peace with all men. The people that created the issue here were not Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, or anybody else. The people, or any other person of faith. The people that created the issue here were those who were attempting, because they had the authority and the power, to force other people to acquiesce, to go along, to worship, to do things which they knew full well there were minority populations that were living in Babylon would not be comfortable with doing. And as we see elsewhere in the book of Daniel, they did this as a part of a strategy to catch those who would refuse to bend a knee to the cultural gods and influences at that time. So if you want to look at this cynically, they knew that the Jews would not go along with this. So the people who are caught up in this and who get turned in for it are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you know the story. The story is they refuse to worship, and basically they just have this kind of courageous place where basically they turn to Nebuchadnezzar and say, listen, we're not going to do it. They practice healthy, holy, courageous, faithful dissent. We are not going to worship this image, and if you punish us, that's okay, because we believe by faith that our God will provide and protect us in the midst of whatever punishment you can dream up. Of course, we know the story that Nebuchadnezzar says, fine, you're not going to worship this image that I've set up, then I'm going to throw you in a fiery furnace, and you're going to pay for what takes place. They get thrown in the fiery furnace. They are protected in the midst of the fiery furnace, and not only as a consequence of being protected, but the image of the fourth person, which we believe is an epiphany or an appearance of Jesus with them in the fiery furnace, then that fourth person becomes a powerful witness to Nebuchadnezzar and others gathered there that day. So that's kind of the story in the nutshell. That's kind of the larger backdrop of what's taking place. And let me go ahead and remind you of the three questions that I gave you at the beginning. The three questions I gave you are, when is it right to dissent, and to what degree? And then not only that, but why is dissent important for people of faith? And third, how is dissent, and we see this in this passage that you're going to read from Daniel chapter 3, how is dissent an important witness to those who are non-believers? So enjoy the discussion, have a great time, enjoy this fantastic passage in the Old Testament. God bless you.